What do orphan trains, the Colosseum, world fairs, and a lost empire called Tartaria all have in common? They're all clues to a past we were never meant to know. In the mid-1800s, something strange happened. All across the world, buildings were being dug out of the ground, not built. The Roman Colosseum, mostly buried in earth until the 1800s. The Great Sphinx, hidden under sand until the 20th century. And while cities were being unearthed, something else began. Orphan trains, hundreds of thousands of children shipped across continents. No parents, no history, just blank slates for a rewritten world. At the same time, world expositions appeared. Massive fairs showcasing entire cities of impossible architecture built in months and then demolished. Why build marvels only to destroy them? Unless they weren't built, but revealed. A final glimpse of a lost world before it was erased. And then there's Tartaria, a vast empire appearing on maps for centuries, and then gone. No war, no collapse, just silence. What happened between 1800 and 1900? What kind of flood buries cities, wipes out empires, erases parents, and rewrites history? This video uncovers the theory of a 19th century Great Flood, a global reset that buried not just buildings, but the truth itself. All around the world, cities built in the 18th and 19th centuries seem to follow a strange pattern. The lower floors are underground, literally buried in soil. Why? From Paris to St. Petersburg, from New York to Istanbul, you'll find what are called mudflood buildings, architectural structures where windows, doors, or even entire floors are submerged below street level. In some cases, buildings appear to have been excavated, revealing what looks like basements that were never intended to be underground. Is it just coincidence? Or poor urban planning? That's what official history tells us. They say cities naturally rose over time, or that streets were elevated for sanitation reasons. But here's the problem. The pattern is global. How could cities across continents, many of them built around the same time, all end up partially buried? And not just a few. We're talking about thousands of buildings, often with immaculate stonework, giant columns, and construction methods supposedly beyond the capabilities of the people who supposedly built them. In many cities, early photographs from the 1800s show these same buildings under excavation, not construction. It's as if entire cities were being dug out, not built up. So the question is, what buried them in the first place? Earthquakes? Volcanoes? Number. The only force powerful enough, and global enough, would be water. And that's where the flood theory begins to gain traction. 19th century flood did happen, then what exactly did it wash away? Let's talk architecture. Around the world we find stunning stone buildings with massive columns, arched windows, domes, spires, and intricate facades carved with mathematical precision. These aren't castles or royal palaces. They're ordinary buildings, libraries, city halls, post offices, train stations. Structures allegedly built by 19th century workers using basic tools, no electricity, and no cranes. Take a walk through cities like Chicago, Budapest, Moscow, Buenos Aires, or even Melbourne. The architectural style is eerily consistent, a kind of old-world classicism that no longer exists. The buildings are gigantic in scale, elegant in symmetry, and often built from solid stone or masonry blocks that would weigh several tons. We're told that settlers or post-war civilians constructed these in just a few years. But where are the quarries, the machines, the manpower, the records? They rarely exist. And here's another disturbing detail. Many of these monumental buildings were already present in the earliest photographs we have, not under construction, but complete, intact, sometimes partially buried in mud. Even stranger, during late 1800s world expos and international fairs, Entire temporary cities were assembled with this same impossible architecture, only to be burned or demolished immediately after. Why would anyone destroy such wonders? Unless they weren't built for the fair, but uncovered for it. The theory? These structures were never built by us. They were inherited from a lost civilization, one that vanished during the Great Flood. And history buried the truth along with the buildings. If this flood happened, would it not leave traces on the maps? It did, and still does. Many 17th to 19th century maps show entire regions labeled as impassable marsh, unexplored swamp, or simply sea. But what's strange is that some of these regions are now dry land, cities, or farmland. What changed? Was it simply bad cartography, or was the land underwater at the time? Look at old maps of Siberia, Central Asia, or even parts of the American Midwest. Vast areas are marked as uninhabitable, waterlogged, or labeled with mysterious Latin inscriptions like terra incognita. And yet, by the late 1800s, these same areas were being repopulated and restructured. Why the sudden shift? Some maps even depict giant inland seas where no lakes exist today, especially in regions associated with the so-called Tartarian Empire. Is it possible these were flood basins, remnants of a catastrophe still visible decades later? And then there are the elevation anomalies. Satellite data shows unnatural flat zones, perfect plains stretching for hundreds of kilometers, as if a layer of sediment had been laid over everything. Geologists call them alluvial deposits. But what if that's just a technical term for mud left behind by retreating floodwaters? When you layer old maps over modern satellite images, the puzzle starts to form. We may not be seeing bad cartography. We may be seeing a hidden history of water reshaping entire continents. So the question is, who was keeping track of what the water destroyed? And who decided to stop talking about it? If a civilization was destroyed, there would be survivors. But what if the survivors were children, and no one told them what happened? Between the mid and late 1800s, both America and Europe experienced a bizarre demographic event, the appearance of millions of orphans. In the United States alone, from 1854 to 1929, so-called orphan trains transported over 250,000 children from crowded cities to rural areas, supposedly to find new families. But where did all these children come from? The Civil War doesn't explain it. Neither do famines or poverty alone. In many cases, children were rounded up from massive urban orphanages that sprang up overnight, holding hundreds, even thousands, of abandoned kids. Some records suggest entire towns had more orphans than adults. Similar events occurred in Britain, Russia, and parts of continental Europe. Children were shipped, adopted, or simply disappeared into new communities. Some researchers believe this is evidence of a reset. The original population was wiped out or displaced by the flood, and a new generation was raised without knowledge of the past. Think about it. What better way to erase history than to remove the adults who remember it and raise a new generation in a world of rewritten facts? Why did so many of these children have no known parents? Why did governments move them across continents as if they were cargo? And why do their stories rarely appear in our textbooks? Were these orphans truly abandoned, or were they the last survivors of a forgotten world? Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, right in front of our eyes. Let's talk about the earliest photographs ever taken. Daguerreotypes and glass plate images from the mid-1800s show massive cities like Paris, London, and New York, with almost no people in them. No carriages, no pedestrians, just silence. Historians explain this by saying long exposure times made moving objects disappear. But how is it that entire boulevards, squares, and markets, all supposed to be busy urban centers, are completely lifeless? It's not just photography. 19th-century paintings often depict ruined buildings, muddy streets, and cities half consumed by debris. In some works, people seem dwarfed by architecture that feels alien, too massive, too ancient for their time. Artists weren't imagining these scenes. They were observing them, recording the aftermath of something colossal. We also find images of excavations, not construction sites. Giant stone buildings being dug out of the ground, not built from scratch. Why would that be the case in city after city? And then there's the mud. So many photos from the 1800s feature knee-deep sludge, carts trapped in muck, and people navigating through urban wastelands of dirt. They called it bad infrastructure, but what if it was the lingering sludge of a global flood? What if these images are not artifacts of technology, but silent witnesses of a world struggling to emerge from a forgotten catastrophe? Before cameras documented the past, painters captured it with brush and imagination. And in the 1700s and early 1800s, a curious artistic trend emerged. Ruin painting, a genre obsessed with collapsed buildings, broken arches, and empty cities reclaimed by nature. Artists like Giovanni Battista Piranesi, Hubert Robert, and others filled canvases with scenes of monumental decay. Towers crumbling into dust. Temples half submerged in soil. Colossal ruins looming over tiny, lonely figures. We're told it was all romantic fantasy, a fascination with the past. But what if it wasn't fantasy? What if it was testimony? These painters weren't imagining ruins. They were documenting them. Many of the locations they depicted were real structures that appeared impossibly ancient, even then. Their work eerily mirrors the mud-covered cities, sunken monuments, and buried buildings we now see in 19th-century photographs. They painted what they saw, a world that had already fallen. A civilization in its aftermath. A beauty haunted by silence. So maybe these weren't just artists. Maybe they were early witnesses to the Great Flood, recording in oil and ink a world that history would soon try to erase. Something strange happened after the mid-1800s. All over the world, new governments, institutions, and ruling elites seemed to emerge, as if from nowhere. In the United States, we saw the rapid rise of industrial magnates, banking dynasties, and secretive societies. In Europe, royal bloodlines were replaced, reset, or merged. Russia restructured its empire. The British expanded globally. But few people ask, how did all of this rise so quickly? What if these weren't just organic developments, but a reboot of civilization after a cataclysm? Look at the timeline. Many key institutions, national archives, historical societies, central banks, and elite universities, were founded in the decades following the supposed flood window, 1850 to 1880. It's almost like the New World needed to re-establish official versions of history, education, and control. Architecture changed, too. Monumental stone buildings gave way to more utilitarian modern styles. It's as if the knowledge to construct old-world wonders was lost, or deliberately hidden. Meanwhile, maps were rewritten, borders changed, old cultures vanished, and powerful new players took control of a shaken, restructured world. Ask yourself, why did so many powerful empires emerge so quickly, just after a time when so many cities were half buried in mud? Is this a coincidence? Or was there a plan to reshape the world after a forgotten disaster? A world reset under new management. What happens when an entire civilization is wiped out, not just physically, but intellectually? After the mid-1800s, humanity supposedly went through a massive wave of invention. Steam power, electricity, photography, flight, radio, all discovered within a few decades. We're told it was a golden age of innovation. But what if it wasn't invention, but rediscovery? What if these technologies weren't created from scratch, but recovered after a massive loss? Before the flood, there may have existed a highly advanced global civilization. The intricate architecture, the symmetry, the acoustic properties of domes and arches all hint at engineering knowledge far beyond what the textbooks admit. Yet after the flood, this knowledge disappears. Engineering becomes clumsy. Cities are rebuilt with inferior materials. Massive stonework is replaced with brick and steel. Entire traditions vanish overnight. We lose understanding of old building methods, sacred geometry, energy systems. Even the idea of free or wireless energy, once explored by people like Tesla, is ridiculed and buried. And just like that, the past is labeled primitive, and we're told that progress only goes one way, forward. But what if we've been standing on the ashes of something far greater? What if the flood didn't just bury buildings, but buried human memory? And the few who knew the truth? Silenced, replaced, forgotten. If there truly was a global flood in the 19th century, then what civilization was swept away? Many researchers point to Tartaria, a vast empire mysteriously removed from our history books. Once stretching across Eurasia, Tartaria appeared on maps for centuries. Then suddenly, around the mid-1800s, it vanished. Not through war or collapse, but through erasure. Who were the Tartarians? No one seems to know. Yet their architectural style, massive domes, grand arches, and intricate stonework, appears everywhere, from Russia to India to North America. Could they have been the builders of the Old World? Maps from the 1700s clearly show Grand Tartary as a major global power. But modern textbooks don't even mention it. Why? Some theorists believe Tartaria was the last remnant of a worldwide civilization, one with advanced knowledge, free energy, and harmonious design. A civilization that resisted the rise of centralized control. Then came the flood, a great reset, and with it, Tartaria was buried, both literally and historically. In its place, new empires rose, new rulers, new narratives. The old world was washed away, and the victors wrote history in their image. But the architecture remains. The forgotten maps still exist, and the story of Tartaria refuses to die. What if the flood wasn't just a natural disaster, but an act of deliberate cleansing? When a catastrophe happens, memories fade, but when it's erased on purpose, that's something else entirely. Following the mid-1800s, a strange global pattern emerged. Nations began standardizing history. Timelines were redrawn. Entire centuries were reevaluated. Historical societies, national archives, and textbook publishers rose almost overnight, often funded by the same small groups of elites. Why? Why did so many countries suddenly decide what their official past would be, all at the same time? Before the flood, maps were inconsistent, dates varied, and multiple calendars coexisted. Afterward, there was a push for uniform chronology enforced by state institutions, religious authorities, and global powers. It was more than education. It was a narrative reset. The past was cleaned up, simplified, glorified, and anything that didn't fit, strange architecture, forgotten peoples, unexplained ruins, was labeled a mystery or attributed to primitive man. We were told the pyramids were tombs, the cathedrals were churches, the orphan trains were charity. But what if those were just cover stories? What if the real story was that a civilization, possibly Tartaria, was wiped out, and the survivors were taught a new history? A version written not to inform, but to control. Because if you control the past, you control the future. Between 1850 and 1915, a series of massive world expositions took place in cities like Paris, Chicago, San Francisco, London, and St. Louis. Louis. These events supposedly showcase the best of human progress, but many researchers see something else. The architecture of these expos was unbelievable: sprawling complexes with towering domes, enormous arches, and palaces more elaborate than anything in modern cities. Official stories claim these megastructures were temporary, built in just months using wood and plaster, only to be demolished shortly after the event. But here's the catch: many of these buildings were made of stone, concrete, and steel. They had running water, electricity, heating systems, and in some cases, underground transport. They were not temporary, they were inherited. Photographs show crews constructing them by digging, not building. Just like with buried cities, it looks like they were excavating ancient structures, cleaning them up, and presenting them as modern achievements, before tearing them down. Why build wonders and destroy them, unless the goal was never to build, but to reveal and erase? To give the world a final glimpse of a civilization that no longer existed. Were the World Fairs a public farewell to the old world before the New World Order took full control? The Roman Colosseum, one of the most iconic structures in human history, was almost completely buried under earth and debris until the 1800s. For centuries, only the upper arches of the Colosseum were visible. The arena floor, underground chambers, and lower levels were covered in 4 to 12 meters of soil. We're told this was caused by natural sedimentation. But how does a massive, elevated stone amphitheater, built of solid travertine, get buried so deeply without some violent event? Excavation of the Colosseum didn't even begin seriously until 1810, nearly 1,300 years after it supposedly fell into ruin. And it took nearly a century to unearth what we now consider normal street level. Why was it so deeply entombed? Oh, but the Colosseum is not alone. The Great Sphinx of Giza, another monumental wonder, was also completely buried in sand until the early 20th century. Only its head was visible for hundreds of years. The rest of its enormous body lay hidden beneath tons of desert sediment. The first serious excavation didn't happen until 1925. How does such an iconic monument, measuring over 70 meters in length, vanish under natural causes? Why did two of the most important structures in world history have to be unearthed, as if something had forcibly buried them? These aren't isolated cases. Temples in Greece, city centers in Rome, even ancient staircases in Cambodia and Peru, all had to be dug out from layers of soil, mud, and sand. What global event could explain this? Perhaps it wasn't time, but a great flood, the same cataclysm that reset civilization, erased Tartaria, and left us with ruins we mistook for new beginnings. Let's connect the dots. We've seen buried cities, sunken monuments, orphan trains, vanished empires, and rewritten history, all pointing to a massive event in the 1800s, a flood that left behind mud, silence, and mystery. But here's the deeper question. Was this flood natural or engineered? Some researchers believe the evidence points to a deliberate reset, a planned erasure of the old world to make way for a new one, a world where power could be centralized, knowledge could be suppressed, and history could be rewritten by the few who survived or orchestrated the cataclysm. This wasn't a freak geological event. Maybe it was a weaponized flood triggered by unknown technology, or even by forces we no longer understand. Earthquakes, liquefaction, atmospheric manipulation, all possibilities. Because if Tartaria really existed, if free energy, harmonious architecture, and decentralized civilization once thrived, then those who seek control would have every reason to wipe it clean. The mud became the curtain behind which a new global order emerged. The orphans became the workforce of a reset society, and we, generations later, inherited a world of lies wrapped in stone. So the real conspiracy isn't just that there was a flood, it's that the flood may have been on purpose. So now we ask, if they could bury entire cities, monuments, civilizations, what else have they buried? Maybe it wasn't just buildings, but truths, memories, entire timelines. The story we've inherited may not be our real past. We live in cities we didn't build, admire monuments we didn't create. We're told we're at the peak of human progress, yet the ruins beneath our feet whisper otherwise. If there truly was a great flood in the 19th century, followed by a deliberate rewriting of history, then the implications are massive. It means our education, our media, even our worldview, may all be manufactured. So now the question isn't, did a flood happen? The real question is, why did they try so hard to make us forget? And if even a piece of this theory is true, what else might be hiding just beneath the surface? Look around your own city. Notice the buildings with half-buried windows, the doors that lead nowhere. Start asking questions, and don't stop. Because when you're told not to ask something, that's usually the question that matters most.